being open-minded and curious is very risky, right? Because what you tried before and worked, is safe.
Today's guest is someone I've been wanting to speak with for a long time, not just because of his brilliant mind, but because of the way he sees the world.
Being curious might uncover things that you don't want to know about yourself, might uncover things that are kind of challenging your viewpoints.
This is the Curiosity Blueprint, brought to you by Flying House Media. Dr. Moran Cerf is a neuroscientist, a professor, a former white hat hacker, an advisor to Fortune 500 companies and heads of state, and one of the most fascinating storytellers you'll ever hear.
All the brain is trying to do all its life is predict the future and avoid dying.
He's been a champion of curiosity, decision-making, and understanding the brain not just for science sake, but to help us live better lives, lead better teams, and have more meaningful human connections. In this conversation, we talk about why reducing the number of decisions you make every day might actually make you a better leader. And we dive deep into storytelling, creativity, open-mindedness, and one of my favorite subjects, how curiosity can actually rewire the brain, deepen our relationships, and change the way we see the world. I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this. There's so much that I want to talk to you about. I will try and keep us on a path, but please feel free to meander and take me wherever you want to go. First, what are we catching you in the middle of today? Well, you have a busy day today?
Well, I just flew in 2 hours ago from Bhutan. 37-hour journey.
And you've got the energy to sit down and have a conversation with me even after that.
I have more energy. This is I got to sleep for 37 hours.
Great, that's excellent. We were just talking about, we have a flight coming up to Austria, and that is nowhere near a 37-hour day, so I'm impressed.
It was remarkable. Bhutan is like an unknown gem in this world, a kingdom. I got to spend time with the king and his wife. It's really a special place. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask, I don't want to get too off topic, but how did you spend time with the king and his wife?
So the reason I went there, I wasn't the only one. I was surrounded by Nobel laureates and other scientists who all were flown by the king to Bhutan. And it's because it's a tiny kingdom and a lot of the young people are leaving and they don't come back. So they turn 20 and they go seek opportunity somewhere else. And the king wanted to find a way to make Bhutan a place that they want to go back to. So he brought scientists and scholars and investors and tech people. There was the CEO of Snap, people like that, to sit with him and help him think together of ways to make Bhutan a place that people want to go back to. That was the premise.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, and actually, you have seemed to live such a fascinating life, and I would love to kind of start back even before your journey into neuroscience and everything that's branched from that. You had a very different career path before getting into neuroscience. Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Sure. I guess I'm what you call a white hat hacker. I started as a kid in the 80s, where computers were a new thing, but I grew up with computers growing kind of the same parallel time. So I got to know them really, really well and tinker with them from young age. So much so that when I turned 18, I was on the radar of the Israeli intelligence. So I was recruited to the Israeli Defense Forces intelligence unit, where I got to do hacking for military-grade purposes. And this trains you kind of with no wheels early on. When I finished the army, I immediately started a company. And this company was basically doing the same thing we did in the army, but this time as a civilian for banks and for the government. So kind of trying to break into banks and find flaws in security to help them do a better job in saving our money.
So you were basically a legal bank robber.
Yeah, it's a very borderline legal, because you're hired by the board who says, try to hack into the bank and steal their money, but the bank doesn't know. So the board is kind of outside and tells you, break into our bank, but for the bank's perspective, you're a criminal. So you have to kind of navigate this very delicate line between what you call a crime to what is like, yeah, I'm allowed to.
Right. Yeah. Well, what is it then that makes this transition from trying to break into banks and hacking computers to now you are devoting your career to neuroscience? So, in my mind, it's similar. Let's see if I convince you of that. I think that the way I see science in general, but neuroscience in kind of especially, is it's like a black box. You can control some of the inputs
You see the outputs, but you have no idea what's happening under the vault. And in that sense, it's kind of like a similar approach that I use to science as the one I used for hacking. I tinker with something and see what comes out and say, oh, I think I understand what's going on inside this black magic box.
It's remarkable. I mean, neuroscience is something the amount of time and effort it must take to constantly be inputting new things to see what the output is and try and figure out what's in that black box. It has to be an all-consuming kind of career.
It's becoming impossible. So I right now try to be kind of up to date on the new things in neuroscience, and I could spend my entire day every morning just reading what happened in the last 24 hours. If I wouldn't have like tools that summarize it for me or students that help me and so on, I wouldn't be able to catch up. There's so much new knowledge every 24 hours that it's impossible to be on top of things.
My goodness. Well, I'll tell you one thing I'm really interested in, and one thing I wanted to talk to you about is I'm a business owner. So Flying House Media is my company where I've been running it for 8 years. And I know you talk a lot about neuroscience in business and especially in decision making. And so I read, and I'm going to look to make sure that I've got the stat right, but the typical business owner I read makes up to 35,000 decisions in a single day.
Yeah.
So for you, how does our brain function having to make that many decisions in a single day?
So here's kind of the bottom line that I try to recommend to a lot of business owners and leaders generally. Minimize the amount of decisions you make. So drop the numbers. You said correctly, we make about over 1,000 an hour. And this means that we don't do a good job on all of them because it's just a resource depletion. Like if you spend a lot of time on what order you're going to choose when you go to a restaurant, you're going to take some of the resources that you then will not use to decide what to acquire as a business owner. So I just say reduce the number and outsource the ones that you don't care about. So I have a rule with my friends. We go to a restaurant together often. Each time, one person chooses for everyone else. Or they just kind of choose and everyone says the same. Just to kind of reduce it. And sometimes you're going to get something you don't like. That's going to happen. But the majority of the decisions we make in our life are not critical. So take away the ones that are not critical and focus on the 20 that will actually change your life. And that's the simplest one that I apply to myself.
So when we talk about these decisions we're making, what kinds of decisions qualify in that kind of research? Is this is everything from what to eat, what to wear, but also internal organization, marketing? Like, what are these decisions?
So I'll tell you first of all what I call big decisions in life. I think that a person, your audience is very much aligned with that, is going to probably make about 5 to 10 decisions in their life that will actually be critical. And right now, I spend time helping government prepare leaders to make those decisions in a better way. And the first thing I kind of try to convince them is that there are only a handful of those, but you know them. And what I mean by that is the decisions that when you look back at your life, kind of on your deathbed, you will say, this is a fork that changed everything. And I can give you examples. So to have a kid and not to have a kid is one of those. How many kids do you have generally? That's one decision. To acquire something that you cannot afford, like a house, that you have a mortgage, you have a debt, and so on. That's a decision that a business owner, an individual would make only a handful of times in their life. And every time when you write this check with 7 zeros, you will kind of shake for a second and you say, do I acquire this business or not? Even if you're wealthy, even if you do it more than once, it's always a critical decision. To get married or not to get married, who to get married to, that's one. Where to live, I think, where to really place. The one that I think is the most substantial that I try to tell my students and they don't listen to enough is which pyramid to climb. I can explain that in a second. Healthcare decisions are ones of those. And I think those decisions really are different. They're not just like a big version of, what to eat for lunch. It's a totally different mindset. And I think that in that sense, I would spend a lot of time on those. I would get advice. I would practice how to make them. I would really train myself to make those, and I would cut all the others. The one that I kind of glossed over that I want to explain to you, make sure that is the pyramid. I was a soldier for 4.5 years. When I joined the military in Israel, I immediately knew what my rank is and was the lowest, and I knew all the steps I could climb to become the top soldier. And I knew that if I spent the next 30 years climbing up the ranks, I would be the head of the army roughly in my early 40s, which is where I am right now. But that would be my life. So I would spend my next 3 decades climbing up the ranks so I can get to the point. Many people, whenever they are see all the trajectory and they start climbing. And they immediately, when they are in the mailroom, imagine themselves as the CEO of Amazon, the CEO of Boeing, the CEO of Google. And they might get there, but it will be the one thing they do in their life. If you don't want to do that, don't start. Meaning, if you're going to not end up where you want to be in 30 years, but get halfway there, you might as well choose a pyramid that you actually want to be the top of, and then climb this one. And it's very tempting to be in the pyramid of sorts and just look up without thinking, do I want to be in this pyramid? If you kind of end up spending 30 years and become the CEO of United Airlines, only to say, I actually don't want to be here, whoa, you wasted a lot of time. So I think the best choice you make is which pyramid you want to start climbing before you actually kind of get caught up in the rat race to just be the top of something you don't want to be in.
So I have a daughter who's getting ready to go off to college, and I think what's being hammered into her head right now is you need to know what you're going to do with the rest of your life. She's 16 years old. And so I think of myself back at 16, had I made a decision which pyramid to climb then, I, sitting in this chair now, could be a much unhappier person. So do you kind of notice that this is becoming more of a trend in the world, is that we are not putting enough emphasis behind taking the time to make that decision the right one?
So first of all, I would say you're allowed more than one. So you're allowed to have 2 or 3 pyramids. It's not that you have to really choose at age 16 and that's it. You committed to it. You can change. And I will even make it easy on your daughter and on kids. It's sometimes okay to do something you don't really like. You don't have to really find it a passion right away. You sometimes can climb up a pyramid for a while, not being sure and letting it grow on you. Many of my students to come to my lab, they want to solve consciousness. That's the pyramid they want to climb. And I tell them in the beginning to paint the fence metaphorically by solving a problem that they don't really care about. Many of them, by the time they finish their small problem, fall in love with the problem that they didn't think is going to be their career. So sometimes I think that there's a little bit of like I don't know, fetish that has to go with finding your passion. And I say it's okay to not have a passion at all, or be good at something very, very many years, and it becomes your passion. So if you're great at something, your passion is going to become that, even if you didn't think this is your passion. Like there are, think of the thing that you consider a boring job. I don't know. Stereotypically, I would say accounting sounds like a boring job. Mm-hmm. The accountants who are amazing at accounting, they're happy, they're passionate about it, they do an amazing job. And if you have dinner with them and ask them about accounting, you will fall in love with their job as well. You would say, oh my God, I didn't know it's so interesting, because they're so good at it that it becomes a passion. And in that sense, I think your daughter is safe. She doesn't have to kind of already know what it would be like to be a 50-year-old her and what would be the thing. It's okay. But I think that, first of all, if you know it's not, you should definitely find a path out quickly. If you know it's not your passion. And I think that the thought, is this my pyramid, should always be in your mind, because it's so tempting to climb whatever hierarchy you're in without thinking kind of if you want to be there. It's just like as soon as you dropped in a place in the hierarchy, you immediately think, how do I get promoted? How do I get to be the CEO? And then it's going to be, rewarding. You're going to be promoted. You're going to get a higher salary. You're going to get more power and so on. And if after 30 years, you get the most power and the most money and the most success, and then you say, actually, I don't really care about that, then midlife crisis happens, big time.
Yes, as I look at my age, I'm constantly thinking about, is there a midlife crisis coming? Fortunately for me, I believe I've climbed the right pyramid. But I think the good thing to take from this is, if you know you're doing the right thing, then never stop. But what I notice so much is we focus on salary as the driving factor. I want to take a job because it's where I can make the most money, instead of thinking it as, if you plan this out correctly, the salary will be a byproduct of making the right decision and setting the clear goals.
I would also say that it's useful to calibrate the world to you rather than kind of to others. There's a kind of a joke but serious note that scientists discovered that when a person wins the lottery, their neighbors start spending more money. And it's because we're very much kind of tied to, what's around me and so on. When you're in Bhutan and the average salary annual is $30,000, the people are super happy. It's the happiest place in the world. They invented their happiness measure kind of instead of GDP. You realize that it's very kind of related to who you're around and what's your kind of environment. So for them, happiness is A, B, and C because that's what they're raised into. And they're very happy with a small salary compared to most American average family, which is to say that if you start by saying, what do I need to be happy? I need friends. I need the feeling of freedom. I need health. Then you say, okay, to get that, what is actually needed financially? You realize probably that you might not need the billion-dollar penthouse overlooking Manhattan and so on, and you're going to get a better version of that if you live in Omaha, Nebraska, in a small townhouse next to a person that you like a lot from your childhood. And if you start to kind of think for a second, not what's offered and I want the best, but what I want, you'll see that you're happier.
So we break everything down into these crucial decisions. These, like you said, when we're on our deathbed, we look back at those decisions. That leaves still over 30,000 decisions that we're making in a day. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting for you to say you kind of discard the ones that aren't so crucial. So this is things like I've heard other CEOs talk about how they wear the same thing every day.
Yeah.
Because now they don't have to spend time on that decision. They meal plan. They eat the same thing every day of every week. Yeah. Now they don't have to make it. So that's really the key, is whittling out those things so that you don't experience, I think what you called it is this decision fatigue.
Yeah. So now we can talk about the other side. How do you make the ones that you actually have to make? So fine, we got rid of the ones that we don't have to care about. We minimized by a lot. We accept that we make mistakes. That's another thing that I'll choose the item on the menu that is second from the top. And if it's not that tasty, tomorrow I'll get something else. That's another way to kind of reduce. But now the other extreme are choices that actually matter. And you have to make those two. And here we have like a framework of many, many things we give advice to, the president of the United States and the leader of the company. And I think to everyone else on how to think about it. And I'll give you a few items for this. One thing, for instance, that is useful to do in advance is decide on your approach to the protocol. What I mean by that, many times when we're about to make a big choice, we vote in our mind. We have this Excel table and we say this is the pro, this is the con, and in the end we say, I want to go A. And then we start feeling bad about it. And then we start saying, well, I actually want B, so I guess this parameter isn't really important, so let's take it out. And I guess I don't really care about this. So we kind of start changing the rules to get the outcome that we really feel we want. So you want the job in Alabama, but the salary is higher in New York, and your friends are in New York, and the woman you love is in New York. But you say, well, actually, I don't really care about friends that much. And you kind of find a way. This means there's a failure of the protocol. A protocol should be objective, and you should decide really based on parameters decided in advance. So what we suggest is make up the weights way before, and then it becomes a little less easy for you to kind of start changing the rules. So for a president that's about to make a choice on, launching a nuclear weapon, if they make the choice and the first time they think about it is on the spot when they're about to press the button, they're going to be biased by how tired they are, how pressure they feel from their advisors and so on. Instead, what the US president is doing is he is essentially separating all the conditions of the decision from the moment, so that he basically says, I will launch weapons every time I have this level of certainty that a missile is coming towards the US. And I'm going to do it without kind of changing the rules. And I'm going to always not do it if I don't have these three conditions met and so on. And then when the moment happens, they have less kind of agency to change the rules. They still might do it, but at least they create a protocol that kind of locks them into a more sane, rational, composed version of themselves. So protocol is one thing. I'm going to give you another example of one more thing that's really helpful. And that is something that the army does a lot, which is called red team. You assign in advance a friend, a person you trust, an ally, to be the opposition. You tell them, Tony, tomorrow I'm going to propose to Sarah, my girlfriend of 3 years. I'm doing it because I love her, because I feel it's a great idea, because I think she's going to say yes, because of many reasons that are making me do this. I want you to give me all the reasons not to do it. You be my kind of, devil that sits here and there.
Devil's advocate, yeah.
And you sit here and tell me why not. And my job is to listen to you, and I'm going to argue with you. And in arguing, I'm going to strengthen my kind of resolve in my choice, but I'm going to also hear that there's another alternative. And you might tell me she's not good for you. And you might tell me that I usually kind of have bad judgment on people. You're going to tell me that it's really useful to have someone that you assign in advance with this role. You tell them your job is to stop me from doing this. I'm going to override you in the end because I'm the decision maker. But I want you to be there, and the promise I make to you is not to hate you. So I'm going to promise you that I'm going to stay your friend, even though you're going to hit me with something hard. And I think it's surprising to me how many leaders don't have that. So they have basically a team that essentially hears them say, I want to go left, and then everyone echoes why they should go left. And no one says, sorry, CEO, sorry, President, I think we should go right. Or even I'm going to pretend to think we're going to go right just to keep the conversation going. Otherwise, it's going to be groupthink that's going to collapse. So assigning a person for this role, very helpful. I'll give you 2 out of the several advice we have.
Well, so you see that a lot is nobody likes to hear why they're wrong. It's not always a good feeling unless you know it's for a good reason. So people do tend to surround, and I'll say it myself, I like pitching an idea way more to a team member that I know is going to like what I pitch because I don't want to hear the bad things about it. So I think we all kind of inherently do that. But for instance, my team is relatively small. We're just 7 people in total. But does this, not only the idea of having people that are willing to push back, but also is it good to have, even in a small team, people that are willing to take some decisions then off your shoulders? So is that part of it as well as a leader, is being able to delegate some decision making to, again, free your mind up to make the right choices when your time comes?
In a way, I like what President Obama said on this thing at some point. He said, in an ideal world, I make 0 decisions. I have a great team that knows how I think and does everything for me. And if something bubbles up to me, it means that it's never happened before, so no one knows what to do, and then I'm the person who makes the decision, but that's the last time I make it, because now everyone knows how I deal with this, and then next time they're going to deal with it. So you kind of train your team to think like you and help you do your job better. That's an ideal world.
Yeah.
If you're in a world where there's a lot of new decisions, and every day something bubbles up to you, then you're in a tough position, which is what many leaders are. Kind of, they no matter how good their team is, it's still too much for everyone in the team to do it, so they still have to make it themselves. But I think it's useful to have in your team a style that everyone kind of knows how the other person thinks and can emulate them in their mind, and also that they know how to stand their grounds and say, you're wrong. And I think that this requires a leader who is confident enough to say to your team, I kind of encourage you, you will not lose your job, you will not lose my respect if you tell me I'm wrong again and again. And one small nuance there is that if your team just agrees with you many times because you of like mind, I actually appoint a person that their job for a week is to just intentionally be the devil advocate, and I say, it's your job for this week. Like, even if you agree, at the end of the day, tell me, I actually agree with you. But for the sake of the day, pretend you don't agree with me, spend time arguing with me, force me to not kind of collapse into an opinion quickly, and I make sure that I change this person every week. So we always start hating him, right? Like if it's the same person always, you start hating them. So we know that today is Jonathan's job to tell us why we're wrong, because he's playing this part, and it's like a debate club. He spends time reading the opposition. He spends time coming up with good answers. It at least keeps us on our toes.
Now, how does the brain work with that when you physically know Jonathan is assigned to be that devil's advocate? He is right now being forced to say no to me. How does our brain not recognize that and then in turn not take his opinion seriously?
It's very hard. I mean, it's often the case that you actually kind of discount that, but it's better than not having it at all. So you're right. Like it's not ever as good as a person actually believes what they're saying, but it's better than no one doing this job, which is kind of what we're starting with. Now, I would say the mind-changing muscle is a muscle that you can train. I sometimes do that as an exercise for myself with friends and with colleagues, just to kind of remind myself how difficult it is. I tell you what is. Most of us, when we have an opinion, and someone comes and challenges our opinion, and we start kind of arguing, aren't just kind of arguing open-mindedly, we're actually rigid. We now are locked in our opinion. We go even more extreme. And before long, you have a stronger opinion than you had before. You think that we should go to the movie, but your wife says, no, let's go to the restaurant. In the beginning, you kind of didn't really care, but you're hurt, your kind of ego is challenged and so on. Before long, you hate restaurants and you love movies and you never understood and so on, and you kind of now extreme on movies without even, and you wouldn't even notice that you kind of went there. So it's our tendency, brain-wise, to, when we are challenged, take an even more extreme version of our opinion and lock to it. And we forget that this happened. Like we don't really recognize that it's our ego that took a toll on us. We think that, no, I'm really into movies that much and really hate restaurants. Now, to train your muscles not to do that, I have an exercise, maybe you can try and see if it works for you, where I decide mechanically, tomorrow I'm going to have an argument about something. Doesn't matter what it is. 4 minutes in, I'm going to agree with the other side. I'm going to, and I'm going to practice changing my mind just to see. So I don't even know what it's going to be about, but I know when I'm going to flip. Now comes tomorrow. The argument begins. It's 4 minutes in, and I tell myself, okay, that's it. This is the moment where you basically say, you know what, you're right. The restaurant did better. I was wrong all these 4 minutes. You're right. Every muscle in fiber in your body says, no, they're wrong. I can, and then you say, okay, I'm going to say restaurants are good, but really I'm going to roll my eyes and make them sure that I'm going to say, but as soon as they say, but fine, I'm going to find a way to go back. I can't. If you force yourself to actually do it and you shut up afterwards and you say, I really believe that, you're going to experience this impossible tension where you do one thing where everything about your brain says, this is not what I wanted. Do it 3 times. It's going to start becoming easier. You're going to actually realize that you can change your mind 180 degrees and it's not that painful and you're getting better at it and you start seeing the other side. Do it 10 times, you will become really, really good in being open-minded, which is the thing that is so hard for many of us. We're kind of trained all our life to stick to an opinion and not change our mind. Train this muscle will become extremely useful. Start by forcing it. It's going to become a habit.
You've just given me marriage therapy is what you've done. And I did not even expect this. So I think if anyone had a choice in whether or not I try that, it would be my wife, because that is exactly what happens is you disagree on one thing and you weren't really that passionate about it at first, but all of a sudden nothing matters more in the world than me being right in this situation right now. So that's an interesting practice.
I think I have a good friend who's a couples therapist. She's a very famous, successful couples therapist, and I try to kind of shadow her and understand how she does. And the one thing I took from her that I think is the best advice I could give to couples is to be curious about the other person while you're on the opposite side of an argument. Like, that's it. Like, it becomes so hard to be curious. Like, you kind of, you color them differently because it's easier for the brain to be in a state of 0 or 1. I'm 1, she or he are 0. Everything they say is wrong. Everything I say is right. It's like, it's the tension. So if you say, I'm going to just be curious, I'm going to try to understand, how can a person that I love so much be so wrong? How can a person that I love so much really not see the world clearly and so on? You know, I have a little poster in my office that all my students love making fun of me. It says, I would agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong. And I think this is the mentality that we have for every argument. It's so obvious that we're right, and it's obvious the other side that wrong, that it makes no sense. And that's why I say, be curious. How could a person that's so smart can be so wrong? What's wrong about them? If you are curious, you'll see that they actually are sometimes right.
First of all, I love that poster, and I think Josh is laughing in the background here. I think we're going to need to get that poster in our office as well. It's a great one. But you mentioned a word that means a lot to me, and that's curiosity. Obviously, the name of our show and something that we try and lead with here all the time. For that very reason, curiosity breeds empathy.
Yeah.
The chance to just step back and try and understand from someone else's point of view, or to say let's find out about anything, is a powerful moment. And so is that kind of what this definition of curiosity means, where it's not just asking what something else could be and being empathetic, but it is actually putting it into practice and saying, not only am I going to wonder about this, but I'm actually going to put myself in the position to learn what it's like.
I think that I'm biased, and so I try to kind of step out of my bias for a second, but still keep the same answer, which is, I think the most interesting thing in the world are puzzles to me. This is why I became a scientist. I was a hacker and so on. And what could be more interesting than other people's mind? how they think. So being curious is really a chance to play this mental game of putting your brain in other people's mind and seeing the world from their perspective. It's rare, it doesn't happen. It's in a way one of the most interesting things you can do. And yet it's so hard because it says maybe my brain, the one I cultivated all my life, is seeing the wrong picture. So it's a threat that is so hard for us to accept. But I think it's worth it. And that's where my bias is, because it's just the most interesting puzzle. Nothing is more interesting than other people's brains.
Well, that's another good point, is these biases that we all live with. I think so often today when we hear the word bias, we think of it as very black and white. We think of it as we treat people differently because of who we think they are. But really, our brain is riddled with biases at all times of things that, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but things that we've seen in the past, our brain assumes that's what's going to happen the next time. Is that basically what a bias is?
So yes, that is the case. And I think it makes sense evolutionary, right? Like all the brain is trying to do all its life is predict the future and avoid dying. And they kind of go together. Like you say, what doesn't kill me? You take the past, you get burnt or suffer from one thing, and you get pleasure and happiness from another, and you try to maximize the second and avoid the first. And in that sense, the brain is a very simple machine. Like it was burnt in the past and tries to not do it again. It's the easiest thing to do. Just that the world changes and other people change. And so a prediction becomes harder and harder. And in that realm of prediction, I think that being open-minded and curious is very risky, right? Because what you tried before and worked, is safe. Being curious might uncover things that you don't want to know about yourself, might uncover things that are kind of challenging your viewpoints. We are afraid of that. My saying is all the good things also come from those moments. So yes, it's risky, it's threatening, it's challenging, it's frightening. All the things that are kind of terrifying to people lie in saying, I'm going to be open-minded and take a risk on not knowing what the future is going to be. That's also where all the good things are.
Well, that makes me think a little bit about storytelling. I was recently having a conversation about this where it seems like that the brain is always searching for this homeostasis, always understanding exactly what's going to happen. And the key to a good story is to surprise it, because it brings it to attention, it envelops you emotionally. And so do you dive into this kind of idea of storytelling for these same reasons when it comes to neuroscience, in that everybody is walking around every day with all of these biases, but a great story challenges those, and that's why it's so captivating to us?
So first, I love storytelling as a person who kind of likes social experiences and telling stories, and I like them as a scientist. And those two go hand in hand in my mind. I study how the brain responds to them, and I try to tell them and see what works. And I'll say that if you really look at Homo sapiens, our kind of species, I think that what made us special is this ability to tell stories. This is the thing that we have that no other animals has that capacity. So we stand out in evolution because of that thing. And it's aligned with our developing a frontal part of the brain that is all about imagining different realities that are not there. And it allows us to really create a shared reality in a way that no other animal can do. So we don't just tell stories about things that are real. We also invent things that are unreal and still believe in them. Unicorns don't exist, but they exist in that someone invented them. There was a guy who came up with the unicorn first. Before this moment, there was no unicorn in the world. And he didn't just keep it in his brain, he told a friend. And now the unicorn exists as a real thing because two people share it in their mind. Then they told a third guy and a fourth guy, and before long, unicorns are as real as anything else because they're ideas in people's minds. They don't have to exist in the real world. We can all paint them and buy products based on them and go to movies all about them and TV series that reflect them and millions of things that make it as real as anything else. We invented things like democracy. That doesn't really exist. You can't eat or wear democracy, but we all care about it right now. We spend billions of dollars on the elections in the US in a few weeks. We really kind of change our existence based on who wins and who loses. So much so on a thing that doesn't really exist. Animals don't have that. Like they just don't think about it and they all work about it. And I can go on and on. Sports is a great example. Like the Olympics happened a few weeks ago. Millions of people in the world sat and watched people in a basketball field chasing a leather ball one side to the other. If an alien came to Earth and saw that, it would think that, like, what was this thing? Like, people just run back and forth. There's no purpose to that. But we all get excited and emotional and cry and laugh or those things. So stories are able to connect brains. And not just kind of metaphorically. When we talk right now, if what I say resonates with you, then your brain waves are almost perfectly synchronized with my brain waves. If we measure your brain and my brain right now, we could tell exactly what moment my story landed in your brain, how you see it, where are the gaps, what word that I used didn't land with you, and you had to kind of interpret it in a different way in your brain, how you tell the story for me, what does it link to in your past. When I spoke about basketball, in your brain, there was a moment that landed of the time that you threw a three-pointer and everyone was cheering that I don't know about. But somehow I turn it on in your brain, whereas in my brain, it's maybe the dunk that I had once. We don't have the same kind of background, but the story somehow made us same. And this is two people, but if you are an amazing artist, you do it with billions of people. Picasso somehow sat in his atelier and drew a painting that only he saw in the beginning, but when he showed it into the world, billions of people went to Spain to see this painting and felt moved, and he somehow resonated with people who weren't born when he painted this picture, didn't have the same world, didn't think the same way, didn't have the same language, because he somehow tapped into everyone's mind. I think that to being a genius is this ability. So geniuses are people who can actually imagine everyone's brain and somehow unite all brains. And now we have science that shows that we can at least measure when it happens and how.
Well, you made me laugh in the middle of that, because in no way was I thinking back to a memory of hitting a game-winning three-point shot. I am horrible at basketball, so that is definitely not where my brain went. But absolutely true in that I think even as you're talking about those things, I'm painting a picture in my mind. I am visualizing playing basketball while you're talking about it. I am visualizing the art that you're talking about. And I think that's, to me, it's fascinating and something I've been learning more about recently. I had a conversation recently with a physician who talked about how compassion and healthcare can literally change health impact in a patient just by showing empathy, by asking the right questions. And he talked about this experiment where you take two people and you put them in separate Faraday boxes. And if those people had any sort of connection before they went in there, and you flashed a light in one of the boxes, it would register in the brain of the other box that was not flashing. And so in some ways, it's, we use these buzzwords all the time of making human connections, but it is actually very literal. We are all connected by our brains.
Yeah.
And it seems to me to be a great reason to not only tell stories, but to find a purpose to truly connect with somebody and understand who they are.
I agree. And I think the most kind of cynical way to think about it, on Earth, there are about 8 billion brains moving around. And all they do is they process information, and they move information from one side to the other. This information flows in the way of a story. We mostly communicate by me using words to put ideas in your brain. So there's just 8 million storytelling databases moving around and sharing data with each other. That's the most cynical, kind of not emotional way about it. If we tell the right story, we manage to make more brains aligned with that. If we manage to make all brains, we can solve most problems that are human in the world, right? All the problems that we face and encounter are problems that we can solve if we just tell a good story that all brains are aligned. Take climate change or nuclear energy or nuclear weapons and so on. In the end, humans invented them. Humans created the problem. Humans can solve the problem. It's just a matter of like finding one story that will kind of envelope all brains in a coherent way, and that's it. We solve the problem. It's the easiest thing to solve. Like one good story can end wars, can make people love each other. It's like very kind of, and I started with cynical and it's very kind of a pastoral view of life, but it's really the case. One good story can change everything.
Well, and because all of this goes back to what you had said before, is just being curious about what's going on in someone else's mind.
And being exposed. I think that, we started somehow with Bhutan, which up to a week ago wasn't at all in my radar, but now is top of mind. I didn't know anything about this country until I landed there, but it has a story. There's a king, and everyone loves the king, and they think that he has their best interest. And it's a Buddhist country, and they have very few resources, but they are very much cherished. When you come and you talk to the taxi driver from the airport to the hotel, when you talk to the person in the market, when you try to wear their kind of national dress and you learn how they fold it and so on, you basically learn a story. Yes, there are facts, but really you become part of a narrative that a country invented for itself. They're all very committed to this narrative. It explains what they do. It works for them very, very well. And you can participate, you can not, but in a way, what happens is that 7,000 people, is how many people live there, have a story, and you become part of it. But you also bring your own story. I'm an American. I bring a very different story about life to this place. So when the driver talks to me, I also kind of bring something that he doesn't know about into his story. And this leaks into the 700,000 brains in Butances. Before long, if you spend time with people, you both influence each other. In a world right now that's very polarized, I would say I sound now a little bit like kind of a Cerf 2024 election. But if you're tired of arguing with people on the internet, try meeting one in person. It immediately makes you see the world differently. And I think that it's as simple as that. Like, take a drive in a taxi with someone from the very opposite side that you think doesn't understand the world and hates everything that you love and really is like going to ruin everything that you stand for. I think 1 hour with him in a cab drive traffic will be enough to make you a lot more open to the most extreme other side.
Which is interesting to think, actually, that I think sometimes the people that we're most comfortable with, the people we spend the most times with in our life, sometimes we can be more closed off to them than we can to a cab driver that we're spending an hour with. And I do wonder where that comes from, how we do develop that closed offness to those that are as close to us as they are.
I think it's the bad side of what we said earlier, which is the predictability. So our brain thinks it knows what they're going to say. So it kind of does both sides in a way, the dialogue automatically. Like, you ask your wife a question, but you really have an answer already. All you do is you wait for her to do one thing that aligns with your kind of image of her and then put her in a box, right? Like, you decided that she is lazy. So even if she says things that's not really, say, well, that's what a lazy person would say if they try to lie about not being lazy. So there, like no matter what, like it's our brain likes to work less. It's more efficient to have a pattern that falls kind of into place and everything aligns with it. So we're not curious. We kind of say, okay, I already know this person, so let me just make sure that what comes now fits in my model, and we can. And I think that's where we are a lot more curious about new and unexpected, explained, and predictable than about the old and the familiar. And I think if we can, on the major device, sometimes try to remove the existing models and say, I'm going to be curious on something I know and pretend I don't know what's going to happen and look at it from fresh eyes, you'll fall in love with your wife in a different way.
Again, I cannot tell you how unexpected this conversation is for me, because I will say, so having conversation is what I do for a living. When I'm not on the podcast, we create testimonial content. We sit people down on camera and have these conversations. And what I find is, after a long day of having conversations, I don't take that same art form home with me, with my wife, and sometimes with my kids, because I'm tapped out. And so that's exactly what I see happening is the moment a story or an answer begins, I can already fill in all the pieces. Yeah. And it's kind of a curse of what I do, but also the fact that I am fatigued. I'm exhausted. So this is eye-opening for me, that maybe curiosity is the approach that I need to take.
There's also a kind of concrete technical advice that works for people's relationships, but also for the workplace, which is sometimes if we get really locked in a cycle where we kind of predict the answer and then we just fit them into one and so on, it's useful to change the environment. So we know that basically a decision is kind of a complex integration of your opinion and the environment's kind of impact on that. It's sometimes you can change the other one, not the first one. So if you and your best friend keep arguing and you really just say, let's just go to a different location, we're in New York, let's go to Los Angeles. You know, if it's really bad, you create even worse problem, because now there's not even a safety of the environment. But if you want to really kind of change the fabric, that's a really technical, very helpful thing. Companies take their employees for a weekend away, whether it's the same employees. You can think, why would they need to go to upstate New York? It's the same people. But there's something about having a different kind of exposure, different setting, also more time. There's kind of less interactions from the outside that allows you to dive deeper or experience the world differently. And I think that that's also in the realm of like advice to leaders making decisions, creators who try to kind of come up with new ideas, and couples who try to kind of sort something. If you can't solve it in words the same way you did before, change the location, change the environment, it's going to help.
Well, that's amazing. Well, you bring up another thing that I really wanted us to talk about, and that is creativity. Storytelling, connecting with people, artwork, all of this comes from this place called creativity, which I don't really know how I would define what creative is because it seems subjective to me. So I think that's my first question to you as a neuroscientist. How do you define creativity?
I think I'm going to come up with something on the slide, but I think it's all the ideas in the world reside in brains. That's the container. So creativity is taking those ideas, shaking them, tossing them, turning upside down to come up with new ideas that are in the brain right now. So you have, if you take all brains collectively and you count all thoughts in there, you have, let's say, 7 billion brains times 10,000 thoughts in each brain. So you have a couple of billions of ideas that exist right now in the world. There are some that are no longer with us because they died, but they wrote them down. So there's ideas in paper, more billions. But in the end, we have a finite pool of a couple of hundreds of billions of ideas. That's all humanity created. Creativity is adding one more. And how do you do it? By just shuffling them and having another one. I'm making the entire humanity into a very mechanical thing. We can count the ideas and so on, but that's all it is. Like every idea came up with someone's mind. Like some brain, some neurons fired, and this thing that didn't exist before is now there. To do that, all the brain can do is move neurons. So it takes what it has and it creates new ideas. And creativity is just the process of making the brain do it faster, more time, and so on, just making more ideas.
So how do we, as leaders, when we talk about the idea of changing your own perspective, changing your own mind, but also leading a team, how can we create an atmosphere where creativity thrives, where you are in a place where you can move those neurons around and come up with new ideas?
I'll give you a very, very tangible, concrete advice that we do with the students, and then we can talk like a more broad thing. But a concrete advice that I tell my students is actually create constraints. So it sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually helpful with the brain. So if I tell you right now, come up with a new idea for a book, go, you will be blocked. It will be kind of, I don't know where to start, it's so many options. But if I say, okay, you can't come up with an idea with a book, here's a different thing. Maybe come up with an idea with a book about two lovers, they're 16-years-old, and their parents don't let them be with each other. Go. Suddenly you say, okay, I know how to start. It's the story of like his mom doesn't let him date a girl from the other part of town, and she doesn't want to be seen with him because, and in a way, when I told you come up with a book, initially, you could have easily created a constraint for yourself and then started with it. But having no constraints feels to us impossible to start. So my advice to people who want to be creative is invent a constraint, random. If you don't like it, then you can invent a different one. But let's start with something that actually blocks you. In my lab, we sometimes randomly say, let's come up with an idea, and we open the dictionary. In a page, we pick a word, and we say, with this word. And it's like, I don't know, piano. And I say, okay, how do we think of an idea in neuroscience with the piano? Well, maybe the piano has keys that are black and white, so let's think of ideas that are actually, it's taking us somewhere. I'm not a spiritual person by kind of nature, but I love a lot of spiritual things because of the process. So I don't, for instance, believe that you can read the future in tarot cards. But I would take a tarot reader any day, because all it does is it forces you to kind of look at a constraint, a picture of a wheel, and tell a story. And then your brain comes up with a story with this constraint, and suddenly the story is actually meaningful. The same is true for the horoscope. I don't for a second believe that there's some kind of thing that if you read it tells you what's going to happen in your week because Orion were in the retrograde in this moment. But I read the horoscope and I say, okay, it says that this week is going to be difficult. It actually is a difficult week because I have to do this. And suddenly this prompt took me to a serious conversation with myself. And in that sense, I support all the palm readers and the coffee reader and whatever method you want to converse. I'm happy if the person reads the future in a coffee, or if they open Harry Potter in page 300 and they start kind of saying, let's see how Harry Potter predicts your future. It doesn't matter. The process of kind of using a prompt to think is a really, really useful way to make the brain think of the world in different angle.
It's so true, because we talk about this concept a lot, where you're always told to think outside the box, and that the world is infinite with possibility. But what we find most successful is when we put ourselves in that box, and sometimes it's through our control, or sometimes it's not. But you need those parameters to find a starting point, and now say what's possible within this box. Okay. So it's really effective. It makes me think of a story, and I don't know if you'll know him, but Rick Rubin, the most famous music producer in the world, has worked with artists that are everywhere from country to rap to hardcore metal. He was working with the band System of a Down on an album, and they were very stuck on lyrics. They could not figure out how to get to the chorus of a song. And so he pointed back to his bookshelf, which had hundreds of books on it, and said, pick a random book out there, pick a random book off that shelf, point to a random page, and read it out loud. The band members went to the bookshelf, they pulled the book off, ended up being the Bible, opened it to a page that was all about angels and death, which was right in line with the song that they were singing about, which was this look at death. And that passage that they read ended up being quite possibly the most famous chorus they ever recorded of all time, all because they just picked a random book and ran with it.
I couldn't agree more. That's kind of the simplest way to help creativity start.
I love that. So if you were to, we've talked about so many things in this last hour, and I warned you ahead of time that might be the case, because I just have so many things I want to ask you about. But if you were to tell those who are listening and reading right now, one thing that you wanted them to take from this conversation, what is the most actionable and important thing that any person that's listening to this can do to kind of open their world up? What would that advice be?
So I think that it aligns perfectly. It sounds like promotion to your show, but I think that to be curious is the biggest gift that your brain can give you. It's counterintuitive to what it's trained for, which is to take the kind of history and click to it because it's well predicting of the future without any risks. This one thing that is kind of counter to your brain is curiosity, which I advocate for. And I think that it perfectly aligns with the show's title. So I swear that it wasn't like a bomb. It was, but I think it's a, and I think we live in a world. I'll make it even more glamorous. We live in a world that has so many cool ideas that it's a shame not to be exposed to them. It's really, I feel like when I flew, I opened a magazine in front of me that I would never open if it wasn't a 37-hour flight, because it's like one of those magazines that are in the plane that are always there. I never just opened them. I never looked at the magazines. Like I assume it's all selling stuff that I don't need and I wouldn't need it. And I said, okay, I have enough hours, I'm going to read. And the best idea I had today came from reading a passage in page 14 of this magazine and so on. And it made me think like this magazine might have been there for my last 2 years of flying, and I never would think about it. And if it wasn't for the 37 hours, I would never look at it and so on. And it was a great one. And I was so happy with this idea. I still am. And I bet there are magazines like this all over the world every day that I don't read. In the subway, I'd rather look at my phone than talk to the person next to me because it's safer. So I do the safe thing. I'd rather kind of, when I give talks, answer the things that I know are a good story and are good jokes and kind of not try new ones. But today, this interview, none of the questions you asked me was ever kind of asked before. And it would have been much easier for me to kind of take you and force you into my comfort zone where I'll tell you about research that I find funny and curious and interesting, and kind of, everyone in the audience would get like safe answers that I tried before and are good. But we went the other side, which is kind of risky. I hope it's playing out for the audience as much as it plays for me, but for me, much better interview.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I would second all of that. And my advice that I always give to my kids is read more books, have more conversations. Like you said, you may think of an accountant as a boring job until you talk to them about why they love it so much, and it just might change your mind.
Exactly.
Dr. Cerf, I can't thank you enough. This has been an exhilarating conversation for me. I've loved every bit of it. So I appreciate you allowing me just to ask all these questions that are at the forefront of my mind. And I have a million others, so I may be calling you to come back at some point.
It was a joy. And I got me on tape saying I commit to it.
Perfect. I love it. Well, thank you so much. Go and enjoy being back home from Bhutan, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you very much for this hour.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
There's something about the way Dr. Cerf thinks, and more importantly, the way he invites you to think, that opens doors you didn't even know were closed.
I think the most interesting thing in the world are puzzles to me. This is why I became a scientist, I was a hacker and so on. And what could be more interesting than other people's mind?
Whether it was about decision fatigue, leadership, marriage, or the science of creativity, I left this conversation feeling like my mind had been stretched in the best of ways. If there's one thing I took from this, it's that curiosity isn't just a trait. It's a tool, a muscle, a way of moving through the world. And according to Dr. Cerf, it might just be the most important thing your brain can do.
Simplest way to help creativity start.
If you haven't yet, hit subscribe to join our community. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for being curious.